seen the early George Powell stuff?
Oh, the George Powell Puppetoons? Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Puppetoons. Yeah, that's the Puppetoon. That's a different technique altogether. It's sort of replacement animation, how they did a lot of that stuff. So instead of having one puppet that you move frame by frame, like for the head, they would have a whole series of different heads, and each head is slightly different from the other. So it was kind of like taking the concept of drawn animation, where each drawing was a slightly different shape of the head, and they would just literally take the whole puppet apart, replace the pieces, and that's how you get the squash and stretch into the early, like the Puppetoons and things like that. George Powell was actually quite another big innovator, and a lot of after he started out with the early, like Puppetoons and kind of stuff like that, but then he kind of branched off into model making effects and movies like War of the Worlds and things like that, doing spaceship models and miniature spaceships and models, which really paved the way for the effects that were in Star Wars. And Willis O'Brien actually worked for the George Powell studio for a time, as did Ray Harryhausen, when Willis O'Brien didn't have a lot of the projects that he wanted to do weren't getting off the ground, so he did work with Powell for a bit.
You ever seen the Harryhausen War of the Worlds?
Yes, I've seen the War of the Worlds. That's Ray Harryhausen. Yeah, and actually, and you've met Ray Harryhausen before, right? Did you actually talk to him? Or
Yeah. It was an awesome experience, getting a chance to meet him in particular. Again, like working with these heroes, and working with Eric Layton, who was the stop motion director, the animation director on Night Before Christmas as well, actually on the production. But before we actually, Peter Jackson took off with it, I got a chance to, back in New York at the School of Visual Arts, there was a presentation given that John Kaymaker, a really well-known animation historian, was sharing, and he brought, Ray flew in from California, and it was really awesome because as an audience, we get a chance to sit and listen to them interview, like as we're doing now, and then open it up for Q&A. It was just great that afterwards to go up and meet him and really just, find out and talk to somebody who's, such an inspiration, to find out, what he thinks. And, at that time, there was rumors of Peter doing, his version of it, of which I was just like, wow, that'd be cool if Peter did it. Like, at that point, I had no idea that I'd be given the opportunity. So I wanted to, ask him his questions and what his thought on modern filmmaking was, because, say, like in person, there's all these amazing things that he's done in the past that has really inspired and changed filmmaking today. And, like, what does he think of today's filmmaking? So, and that's what I asked him. And basically what he said to me was, I said, well, now there's computer animation. Like, what do you think about computer animation? Like, what are your thoughts on filmmaking in general when it comes to the new times? And it's interesting his feedback, because at first he's like, well, today's filmmaking, he kind of coined it as being, it's very disturbing how much violence is in modern filmmaking. And, that was one thing that he, at that time, and again, we had no idea about, Peter's production or what it was going to be like. We were all just, anxious fans at that time. So we had no idea what Peter would actually portray it, into the con, because of Peter's background, which is funny, being in splatter films and things like that, that it's like, oh boy, it's going to be probably pretty nasty. I mean, you see that in the film, like, he bites his tongue off. But anyway, like, Ray was just like, yeah, I'm a little concerned with today's modern filmmaking, that that the students and filmmakers and the younger audience growing up in modern day films, like, do they rely to problem solve on violence, to help answer questions? Is it easier to open it up with some summer blockbuster where it's like, bam, big fight scene battles, like, just go right into it, like, there's no development, and this doesn't bring up this gradual build, which they did in 33, which is what Peter did in the modern version as well, is that there's this gradual ramp up, you develop the characters, and it's that contrast between the build and the climax that actually gives you the really dynamic moment to make them more so dynamic. And so he's like, yeah, it'd be great, if when Peter does his, that he can kind of keep that in mind and really develop the characters, really give a sense of when you first arrive, there's a bit of suspense as to what's going to happen. And he successfully did that, I feel, so that was great. And what he thought of animation, computer animation in general, and he's commenting on that, well, with computer animation, viewing it as like, well, it's just another means of expressing animation, it's like it's a tool for anyone to use, and yeah, it would be great, to get in there and to animate on a computer, but it's awesome to meet him in person, to see he represents stop motion, the idea of the dirty, the rough, the tangible. Like, he's sitting there, he's a hero. You'd figure he'd be in some kind of like aura, and he's just like, he's your grandfather. He's got like stains from his lunch on his jacket. He's just all kind of a very nice and respectable man, but he's just totally like your grandfather, totally. And it was just awesome to see that. You could see it in his talking, is that he's like the tangible, like well, with computer animation, you have and when you make things too realistic, it can be a bit mundane. Like, people will identify with it, and like a lot of the modern films now that try to go very realistic in their filmmaking, that it mimics reality, and you lose touch with it because you see the instant flaws in it. Where what Wills O'Brien was able to do back in the 33 version is that Kong is like standing up and you have this relatedness to him, but he doesn't move, doesn't have exactly the weight maybe he should, or isn't as smooth or as fluent, but he gives such a believable performance in his emotion and body that people totally look past it because they're totally into the moment, the action, the story, that they don't criticize that kind of thing because it's not like a photorealistic gorilla. So he was interested to see how Peter would handle that, to really take advantage of modern technology and to take advantage of what a computer can do, but at the same time really look past the smoothness to it and just really make it fun and dynamic and entertaining to watch.
I actually met Ray Harryhausen here in Vancouver a few years ago. He actually flew in for an animation festival that had happened, and it was in 2001, I believe. And I just met him very briefly. I just told him I was a stop-motion animator instructor. And what he said, the only thing he said to me was, "Oh, you're still young. You haven't pulled your hair out yet," because he doesn't have any left.